thank you for joining us. I'm Melissa Harris Perry, and this is my quarantine due. And this is Color Change's special anniversary town hall, marking 1 year since the debut of Netflix limited series, When They See Us. And in this moment, calling on all of us to reflect on how we move from pain to power. Now, we have a terrific panel today. I'm going to introduce them in a moment, but I want to begin with a bit of a reminder about where we are in May 2020. It has been 155 years since the passage of the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in this country, but left a carve-out for incarceration. It has been 28 years since the acquittal of the Los Angeles police officers who were filmed brutally beating Rodney King. It has been 26 years since President Bill Clinton signed the Omnibus Crime Bill. It's been 15 years since off-duty police officers fired a hail of bullets into Sean Bell's car. It's been 6 years since 12-year-old Tamir Rice was killed by Officer Timothy Loman on a Cleveland playground. It's been 5 years since Walter Scott was shot in the back by Michael Slager, a North Charleston police officer. It's been 5 years since Sandra Bland was found hanged in a Texas jail cell. It's been 5 years since Freddie Gray died after riding in the back of a Baltimore police van. It's been 5 years since we all listened to a bikini-clad teenager cry out, "Call my mama," while a police officer pinned her to the ground with his knee. It's been 4 years since Betty Jo Shelby shot Terrence Crutcher on the side of an Tulsa, Oklahoma roadside. It's been 1 year since the debut of When They See Us. It's been 6 months since a judge hugged Amber Geiger after her sentencing for walking into a Black man, Botham Jean's home, and shooting him to death as he sat on his own couch. It's been 3 months since Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down by white men who chased him in their pickup truck while he was simply jogging in his own neighborhood. It's been 2 months since Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old EMT and therefore a frontline first responder, was shot to death in her own bed by 3 Louisville Metro Police Department officers. It's been 6 days since Amy Cooper called the police on Christian Cooper. And that was the same day that George Floyd begged for his life as the breath was pushed out of him by a Minneapolis police officer who refused to take his knee off of his neck. Now, of course, all of these moments must be remembered and absorbed, even as we live in the midst of a pandemic that is disproportionately taking the lives of Black and Latinx folks and Indigenous folks and ripping its way through our jails and prisons, where 50 years of public policy has locked away so many in our community. If you are exhausted, if you are angry, if you're in pain, if you're confused, if you feel a little bit hopeless, please know you are not wrong. You are human. So what we want to try to do in our time together today is to try to think about the ways we can harness all of this pain and move it into some kind of powerful, transformative tool for addressing the injustices in our criminal punishment system. Joining us today to do that very hard and important work are Rashad Robinson, president of Color Change, a leading online racial justice organization driven by 1.7 million members and sponsoring our event today. Tiffany Caban, who's a passionate career public defender, yay for Gideon's Army, who was also a candidate in the Democratic primary for the Queens County's district attorney in the state of New York. Dr. Yusef Salaam, who is obviously now an adult, but Dr. Salaam was one of the 5 boys who became known collectively as the Central Park Five. Now, their convictions were vacated in 2002 after these young people spent between 7 and 13 of their years behind bars. In 2018, Dr. Salam was appointed to the board of the Innocence Project and, of course, worked closely with filmmaker Ava DuVernay on the film that we are talking a bit about today, When They See Us. And then finally, Scott Roberts, who is Senior Director of Criminal Justice Campaign for Color of Change, working to end mass incarceration and fight the criminalization of Black people. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Salam, I actually want to begin with you. Here we are in a week where Amy Cooper stood in Central Park and called the police as a tool, as a weapon. And I have to say, I thought of you, actually of all five of you repeatedly, as I heard her say, I'm standing in Central Park and there is an African-American man threatening me. And I was just wondering if you could walk us maybe through your reactions to this moment.
My immediate reaction was thinking about Emmett Till, thinking about when they cry, we die. Because of an accusation, you have the atrocity of legal lynchings, real lynchings, and all of the injustices that go on and continue to go on, because unfortunately what is always the law in America is white supremacy, white male dominance.
Rashad, I tried to walk us through some of the difficult moments we're in right now as an attempt to do some storytelling. And storytelling is, of course, one of the crucial strategies that Color of Change uses. Can you talk to me a little bit about When They See Us and the ways that highly effective storytelling, and I'd love for you to jump in as well, Dr. Salam, on this, but how that really highly effective storytelling of When They See Us intersected with the work of Color of Change in this past year?
Well, we've had so much awakening over the years in terms of people's understanding of the criminal justice system, of racial justice. Sometimes it can feel like we haven't made any progress when we see these many different moments, but we have to recognize that we've had moments in people's consciousness changing. White people in a Starbucks taking out their cell phone and videotaping things. We've seen, the financial company, Franklin Templeton, that no one would think of as a progressive institution, use racism in their statement, right? And so we can't mistake those things for systemic change, but we can also...
I do want to clarify, they use the word racism as opposed to being racist in their statement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's why it's important that we know exactly what they did versus what they didn't do, but also the progress that symbolizes, right? And so what I think was really powerful about When They See Us as a piece of content, right, there's been a lot written about the Exonerated Five. There's been a lot written about the what has happened. The documentary was incredibly important. But for people to go back and see these young men as boys, and to have the storytelling portray them as children was incredibly, I think, important for how people then kind of got to place this entire story in the context of what we now know about a system that is deeply unjust. And so that, for me, was why it was incredibly important. It was important that people didn't have to go out to the movie theaters and see it, and were sitting at home and watching it. It was important that it was a well-done piece of content. Yusuf and I have been on the road a couple of times at different events talking on panels about the piece of content, and that there was energy put in engaging the community and giving the community something to do. All of those were important to making this a piece of content that just sort of wasn't a flash in the pan, but sat inside of a larger cultural movement for change. And that started at the leadership level of Ava DuVernay, who reached out to us and said that she wanted to partner on helping people take action, that she didn't want people to just, register to vote, or she didn't want people to just be outraged and sitting at home. She wanted people to translate that into action. We don't create content on that scale at Color of Change. We do create some content, but we don't create content at that scale. What we do is we help people take action. And that awareness to action was so incredibly important.
So, Dr. Salam, let me go back to you on this for a moment, because I think part of what I heard Rashad say there around the importance of telling it in a story that allowed us to see the childhood, and the fact that you went to Emmett Till, right? There are many possible touchstones of thinking about of lynching and the loss of the lives of Black men, women, and children in this country. But somehow the Emmett Till piece does resonate for us, in part because of his childhood, because he is still such a boy. And to watch a system willing to crush a child, I think is revealing of just the depth of white supremacist evil. And so I feel like in many ways that's also true for all five of you as children. The idea that the system was willing to do this to children. Can you reflect on that a bit for me?
You know, the thing about it too is that it's as American as apple pie. We're talking about, we were brought over here as chattel slaves. They didn't bring slaves over as chattel slaves. They brought people over. And I want to kind of also talk about the fact that in the 13th Amendment, here we have a document that's a part of the founding documents of this country, which basically states that slavery is abolished except if you get punished for a crime, right? Black and brown folks have notoriously either died at the hands of the system, something happened, and they have notoriously had to prove their innocence even from the grave. That means that they were seen as guilty and had to prove their innocence, as opposed to what the system says, which is why I call it the criminal system of injustice. I referenced Emmett Till because what happened to us, which was eerily indicative of what could happen and what has happened in the past, we became the modern day Scottsboro Boys. Because 2 weeks after we were accused, an ad was ran in New York City's newspapers calling for the death penalty for our case. Now I say that because I want folks, when they revisit this, not to look at it from the perspective of this is just an ad that was ran in the papers. Somebody's thought went into this. Somebody's creativity went into this. Somebody's, well, I like that version, I don't like that version, went into it. And then 2 weeks after that process, the ad was ran, and that ad said, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. We were 14, 15, and 16-year-old children, and our phone numbers, names, and addresses were placed in New York City's newspapers. It was as if that ad was a whisper into the most evilest spaces in society to call somebody to go to our homes, to drag us from our beds, to hang us from trees in Central Park. Because when you think about what happened to Emmett Till, eerily similar, drug him from the bed that he was living, that he was sleeping in, beat him to death because someone accused him of whistling, as if the reaction rather, fit what they thought was a crime. And that's the part that's challenging, the utter way that the system takes our youth and replaces hope with fear and trepidation, takes the idea that you can be all that God wants you to be, and then turns you into a tool for the system.
Dr. Salm, I so appreciate the way you frame that, in part because that kind of agonizing shift that we see happen, and I feel like I've been watching it happen in social media as the events of the past several weeks have been unfolding. We were already, so many of us, so traumatized just by the realities of quarantine and of coronavirus and of the death that we are seeing around us from a pandemic. And then laying on top of that, the state violence that we have witnessed and the ways that other citizens are attempting to create state violence against us. Scott, I want to come to you on this for a moment, because I think when I say easy, I don't mean that it's wrong. It feels so human to descend into that story from 13th Amendment all the way to this moment and feel as though, what could we possibly do? So I want to take a breath and say, okay, it's been a year since When They See Us provided some kind of window into thinking about young Black men who were brutalized by, and Latinx men who were brutalized by this system. And yet we finally, and there's no There's no way to take back any of those years. But there feels like there's some kind of victory, there's some kind of justice, there's some kind of life on the other side of so much brutality. So Scott, talk to me about what kind of life has been on the other side of this long story of brutality over the course of the past year. What have we won? What things are in the victory column for us in the past year?
Yeah, good question. I think in terms of when they see us, I think there were direct impacts that came out of the film and people getting a better understanding of the story, who was responsible. And, you know, these were individual people who had gone on with their lives, the prosecutors, the police who perpetrated this like injustice against Dr. Salam and the rest of the exonerated five. One example was Linda Fairstein, right? She was one of the investigators who went on to become a professor of criminal justice and to publish a number of books that were basically written based on her experience in the justice system and in law enforcement. And there was an outcry when people realized that she was still personally profiting off of the role that she played in the system. And she, that led to her having some really detrimental professional impacts, right, on her career, both her job as a professor, publishing companies coming out saying that they would not be working with her anymore. We, as an organization, targeted a number of publishing companies and were part of the effort that achieved that. And I think, you know, although it's much removed in terms of time, I think it is important because one of the biggest problems that we have with our system is that there are so many ways in which people have found to leverage the system to their benefit and leverage their roles in mass incarceration and perpetrating violence against our communities. And I think for us, big picture, it really put a focus on some of the players in the criminal justice system who we've been working to expose over the last several years, right? The locally elected prosecutors have been a big focus of ours post-Ferguson, and we saw the roles that prosecutors play in the system and the ways in which they manipulate different workings in the system, from plea deals. You know, one of the things that I remember talking about when they see us in the barbershop and with family was how appalled people were at the way in which the confessions were. People were manipulated into their confessions. And I think people started to realize this is how we've filled the prisons with so many people, right?
So Scott, hold on for me real quick. I want you to hold for a second because you said something there that I really want to go to Tiffany on for a moment, and I promise I'm going to come back through. But when you talked about the focus of Color of Change on the question of prosecutors and locally elected prosecutors, I just want to take a moment and come to you, Tiffany, because you are, I mean, there are only a few times I am ever going to introduce someone by saying that they are a career public defender who ran for a district attorney role, right? These are frequently seen on the opposite. I mean, they clearly are actually on the opposite side in any given adjudication, but also it can be pretty tough to make the transition from public defender to being the state's attorney. So I'd really love for you to do two things for me here. Kind of put on your teacher hat and help people who may not be spending all of their time hanging out in the criminal justice system to understand what the role of the public defender is and the role of the state's attorney, and sort of what maybe even those different levels of the state's attorney look like. And then the last thing I want to say is, and then why were you running? What made a career public defender want to do that? So those two things.
Well, I think in terms of putting that teacher hat on and talking about the roles, very different roles when you're standing on one side of the aisle than the other. Public defenders, we wear a lot of hats. You know, we play the role of social worker. We are zealous advocates. We work with families. One of the things that I talked about a lot in terms of bringing people into what our experience is that we don't just represent our client in a courtroom, but we get to know their families. We sit in their living rooms. And it is a much different dynamic than a prosecutor who spends very little time interacting with folks on a personal level. And it is ethically our duty to do everything we can without like crossing that line, right? Like we toe that line and just push it to the edge as far as we can to try to get a good outcome for our clients. And a lot of that also involves learning who our client is, because we have the very extreme privilege and job of humanizing our clients, because what our criminal legal system does by its very nature, by the way it functions, is literally dehumanize Black and brown folks. You are a rap sheet, you are a docket number, you are less than. And so we are tasked with honoring that person's experiences, their prior traumas, the root causes of what may be going on in their lives and their communities, and having that be a part of the advocacy. It's a really, really important thing, in addition to making those like technical legal arguments, right? And then on the other side of the aisle, you have the prosecutor, who is literally the most powerful actor in our criminal legal system. Folks want to say maybe it's—
Say that again.
The prosecutor is the most powerful actor in our criminal legal system. It's not the judge, it is not the jury, it is not the defense attorney, it is the prosecutor. And the prosecutor decides who's getting charged, what they're being charged with, whether they're going to be able to exercise their constitutional right to the presumption of innocence and fight their case from home, or whether they're going to be held on cash bail that they can't afford, and how a case is ultimately resolved, right? What kind of disposition? Will it be an alternative to incarceration? Will it be a jail or a prison sentence? All of these things are within the prosecutor's control. And the other thing that I particularly found really scary as a public defender is that they're also watchdogs of themselves. Mm-hmm. So, they are tasked with the job of following certain rules and turning over certain evidence, but it's a rare occasion where you can actually catch them in the act of prosecutor misconduct, because it's information that we, by its definition, wouldn't have access to or wouldn't have a way to access. Mm-hmm. So it's a really, really powerful position that comes with a lot of responsibility. And to start moving into your second question, I had to reconcile a lot of things when I decided to run. And certainly it was a perfect storm of events. I think folks like, Larry Krasner and Rachel Rollins and Kim Fox, they were modelings of what could be possible and shifted an Overton window. And I saw an opportunity to take it further. It's harm reduction. I'm going to be quite honest with you. Best case scenario is that you get a good person in that office to reduce harm. They're not a savior. This is, this structure, when we talk about the history and understanding that it was directly born of slavery, that the function of this office hasn't been to produce safety. In fact, there are things that reduce safety in our communities. And so in a lot of ways, it felt like the continuation of my advocacy for my clients to have a public defender sitting in that seat, doing as little harm as possible and really shifting the narrative. The reason why I ran too was because of successes like Larry Krasner and Rachel Rollins and those folks. The playbook was out there and people were saying the things. And I was a public defender in Manhattan, right? It wasn't, I had rallied with folks not that long afterwards, activists calling for the Conviction Integrity Unit to reopen and look at every single case that Linda Fairstein had touched. These injustices are still continuing to happen and be perpetuated while you have a DA like Cyrus Vance in Manhattan saying, hey, I've got these seemingly progressive policies out there. And I come into court the next day recognizing that my clients, my overwhelmingly Black and brown and poor or immigrant clients, were always the exception to the rule. So I jumped into the race didn't think that I had a shot to win initially, but saying, I just want to hold people's feet to the fire. I want to uplift, directly impacted folks' stories, allow them and give them the space and opportunity to tell their stories, to speak their values, to speak on what true safety looks like and means for them, and to call these other folks out on their nonsense. And that was a big part of it, because our DA's offices, overwhelmingly, they are about numbers of convictions, lengths of sentences, winning at all costs. And that is how these things, that is how state-sanctioned violence in our communities persists. And we had an opportunity to change that and say, actually, our job is public safety. And so that means the best public health and public safety outcomes. And measuring like that means that you move differently within the space.
So Tiffany, I think what you said at the end there, I think is so valuable. Rashad, I want to come to you for a moment. But so that idea that there may be good or bad actors in the system, but when the system measures success in ways that can only create more harm, if it is about how many convictions and how long people are put away, then good and bad actors, right, are going to be doing harm in community. And so, Rashad, I want to come to you, because part of what Tiffany did there, both by talking about harm reduction and with that lovely little roll call, is maybe, again, say some names that not everyone who is joining us for this town hall may know. So I'd hope that maybe you could walk through some of that roll call. We know that in, for example, San Francisco, there's a former public defender who's now the city's attorney, which is actually a kind of, I'm sorry, my sister's a public defender in San Francisco. It's very exciting what's happening there in terms of that work. But, we heard Kim Fox's name. Are there public defenders, but also most specifically, are there prosecutors around the country, Rashad, who are reducing harm some, who are maybe not getting it all the way right, but who are enacting some practices that we can think of as wins?
Yeah, I mean, Tiffany actually named some of them, and that's and what's great is that many of these folks are in big cities where where we then can actually see the numbers and the impact of the numbers, right? I care about the stories so much and talk about the stories, but then sometimes the stories can be used against us. But someone pulls out a good story, and then you look at the numbers and nothing has actually really changed. And so we're looking at both. And, we've seen in places like Cook County and Philadelphia, real both reductions to jail sizes with sort of ongoing public safety being sort of still at the forefront. We've seen sort of an interest in and focus on dealing with police in different ways and oversight and accountability. We've seen, I remember being, running campaigns against Anita Alvarez in Cook County and delivering petitions and not being let upstairs to deliver the petition. And not being allowed and not being given a meeting, right, with the district attorney, to actually being able to have real conversations with the district attorney. Kim Fox tells the story of the sort of early first couple of weeks where she gave a list to her people of folks that she wanted to meet with in the community, and her staff sent her back a note letting her know that those people were banned from the floor. And her saying, well, they're not banned anymore. I need to meet with these folks. And so part of some of our theory about power here is that decision makers have to be nervous about disappointing us. They have to be accountable to us. I think another thing that Tiffany said that's really important, and I think really important to all of this work, right, is that district attorneys, no matter how much we support them in an election and hold up good changes, are not saviors inside of a challenging system. We have a system that we have to disrupt. This is not simply about getting better actors inside of a bad structure. This is also about dismantling and changing the structure. And so, yes, day in and day out, as I think about the harm that bad district attorneys do to my family, to my community, I am here to put better actors inside of that system so we get better results. And we also have to fight for the type of changes in our justice system, the type of investments in dealing with poverty and mental health and so many other things that actually change our focus from incarceration to health and safety and dignity. And so all of those things have to be part of our plan. The other thing I will just say is that part of this has to be that narrative shift of helping the public. And so it's two things from a narrative perspective. One is ensuring that prosecutors see their job as different than how they saw it before. And the other is helping the public see the role of prosecutors different as well. And so part of this is that we can't just win our campaigns when a prosecutor doesn't prosecute a police officer, right? Because it can't just be about not who they didn't prosecute. It has to be about who they do prosecute and about all the Black and brown people they've put behind bars over the years. And so sometimes we've gotten to a place where people will go after the district attorney only when they don't prosecute a police officer. And that's important, right? But we have to make sure that we start building a narrative and a structure around what accountability and consequences looks like in our society that doesn't just look at the only thing that we have is prisons and jails, and that we have investments that look different. And all of that has to be part of the work. And that is why we sort of need powerful content, powerful storytellers, powerful stories that can reach way more people than any op-ed piece or any sort of political campaign, things that get into people's homes and start to shift their mental models so that then when we have visionary candidates like Tiffany, when we have folks who are in office making deep changes and experiencing all sorts of pushback from entrenched forces like police unions and judges and other folks, that we have the public saying, no, that is the role of a prosecutor. And when something comes across the desk of a prosecutor where they have a decision that they can make, because as Tiffany said, they are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space, that the prosecutor says, yeah, actually my job is to do this in this situation, not to do what I did before. That is how we build power, and that is how we make the people more powerful over the systems that shape their lives.
So, Rashad, as you're talking about the structures and systems, Scott, I want to come to you just on one real quick point there. I mean, not quick, important, but like a small but crucial one. And it's just for me to say these two words and then let you go. Cash bail.
Yeah, I mean, cash bail is a prime example, I think, of a policy area that we've been able to create a lot of movement on based on impacting how prosecutors see their job, as Rashad was just saying, right? So I'll try to do the quick cash bail primer. Which
I know.
Basically, I think most people have a sense of cash bail as a thing, but not necessarily a sense of how it really works, right? And this is some of what Rashad was talking about in terms of storytelling. One of the things that we've tried to do at Color of Change is influence even like how Hollywood is portraying how the justice system works, right? Because what we see on Law and Order is not really how bail hearings work, for instance. As long as Tiffany could attest. But basically, this is the idea that when people are accused of a crime, they are held in jail before being convicted on a cash bail, which means they have to pay to get out, to keep it short and simple, right? You have to put up a certain amount of money to be released, and the idea is that that's going to make you show up to court. Research has shown that there are a lot of other more simple ways to get people to show up for court. It could be as simple as sending a letter to the house reminding them of their court date. It could be just as effective and doesn't have the negative impacts, which we focus on here at Color of Change, really in two ways. One is it fuels incarceration, especially at the local level. Our local jails are actually packed full of people who have not been convicted of a crime. The vast majority of local jails in the United States the majority of the people inside are there because they're waiting on a trial. And most of them have been given a cash bail, which means the system has officially said you could come home, right? That's fine for you to go home. But the calculation is that you can't afford it. But the other part of it is the economic exploitation, right? So if you do pay a bail, you're probably going through a bail bonds person. So there's a whole exploitative industry that has come out. We say it's kind of like the horror, like nightmare child of like predatory lending and private credit, right? Just hitting people really from all sides. But what we have been able to do by the movement that has been built around prosecutor accountability and reforming the pretrial system is that in a lot of places, as these more progressively oriented prosecutors are coming into office, they're creating lists of offenses that we're just not going to seek money bail on. Like some of them have gone as far to say, we're not seeking money bail at all, right? It gets complicated from there in terms of whether or not people are still able to come home. But this is a huge steps that are saying, we're not gonna punish people before they're convicted. We're not going to run basically debtors prisons or poverty prisons, right? Because only people on the inside are the people who can't afford to get out. So I think it's a prime example of the kind of impact that we can have, both when we pay attention to these offices, and once we get the people in there that we want, put that constant pressure on to make sure that they follow through on the agenda. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salam. I saw when I said cash bail, and when Scott began to answer, I saw you kind of perk up and look into. So I want to give you an opportunity if there was anything else you wanted to add around that issue.
You know, that's the huge trap. That's the huge trap, right? Because I'm thinking about the young man who was on Rikers Island,
Khalif
Browder, who was there waiting, going through all of the trauma that by which, I got to tell you this. When I was in California with the rest of the guys and we were watching When They See Us with Ava DuVernay, this was like our debut of seeing this film for the first time. We had not known each other's stories. And so we, for the most part, had thrown all of the trauma of the prison industrial complex and what we had gone through behind our backs and never looked back. And now we were revisiting it, and we were revisiting it in such a powerful way that every single part of that series broke us down and built us up again. And when we got to part 4, I remember Ava DuVernay pulled me aside, because you got to remember, Corey went to jail because he was with me. He went to jail because prior to him being with me, when they came to get me, I went to the corner store where he was at eating chicken with his girlfriend and said, "Hey man, come on, we about to go hang out in the park. We'll be right back." You know? And for the most part, I never knew what Corey went through. Now, when Ava DuVernay pulled me aside, she said to me, she said, "Yusuf, I need you to understand, this part 4, is the TV version." So you think about what happened to Khalif Browder and the Khalif Browders of the world, how he's let go from prison after they finally say, "Listen, we're dropping all the charges. We gave you a bail, but you know what? We found out that you're not even going to be prosecuted." But in the midst of all of that, he's going through this trauma. He's being traumatized. He comes home and he can't turn off the trauma, and he ends up taking his life. And so that's the first thing that popped into my mind. How many countless others of us have been run over by the spike wheels of justice, not only with just a cash bail thing, but we are seen as guilty and have to prove ourselves innocent. The system sees us and says, we don't make mistakes. We're infallible. If we go after you, we go after you because you are the culprit. But when we go after the other, they're afforded every opportunity under the law.
What you just said about, there was so much powerful, but you said this is the TV version, right? That in her brilliance, Ava DuVernay gave us a glimpse into the trauma, but in her humanity chose not to give us the pornography of suffering.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of that in the context of the videos of Black Death that we are now once again facing. And I think many of us we're struggling with, I see us publicly, actively struggling with this question of how do we tell the story, right, Rashad? How do we tell the stories that are compelling, that show us as human, that indicate our vulnerability, without engaging in that pornography of suffering, without simply being, by clicking our Facebook pages, doing the same thing that all of those lynchers did when they took photographs of our burned bodies and sent them as postcards around the country as a trophy. Rashad or Scott or Dr. Salam or Tiffany, anyone who wants to weigh in on just helping any of us to think about how do we tell the story of how bad it is without engaging in a way that makes it worse?
You know, I mean, and I'd love also to hear from everyone else, in particular Tiffany, who comes face to face with these stories, in her work, during her work as a public defender. But for us at Color of Change, we constantly are trying to pair these stories with action, with a deep recognition that the stories alone don't actually mean that anything changes, that people could become very used to the stories and very comfortable with the stories, that the presence of them alone doesn't mean that we're any closer to making things change, right? We live in a country where we mistake presence for power a lot. And I talk about this a lot at Color of Change, but I talk about it so much because it does animate so much of how we think about our work, right? Where you can mistake a Black president for thinking that we have become post-racial. We can think that a pop star that announces she's pregnant and the internet stops means that America loves Black people as much as it loves Black culture. And it can hate Black people and love Black culture at the same time. And so all of these things sort of operate in sort of a connection and sort of a deep connection to make us believe that the presence of these stories means change. I get so many requests from journalists. 3, I think today, big press, wanting to know, the presence of these videos, do you think it means that things are like becoming more clear, more closer to change? Do you think it's happening more because there's videos? And I'm just like, I mean, the videos have been there for the last couple of years, and we've still seen police officers get off. The videos have been there, and we've still seen ways in which doubt has been sown about the credibility, the humanity, the worthiness of the victim. And so what we sort of recognize with all of this is that the videos are important to mobilizing energy. The videos are important to helping people feel passionate about doing something. And at the same time, the videos alone are a disservice to a change unless we pair that with strategic action. And strategic is also important, meaning that we have to direct that energy at places where change actually can happen. That we also have to be clear with the public about what is the bar and the standard for change, right? Is it simply getting a police officer fired? I would argue no, that plays into this whole idea of bad apples, when we recognize that the tree and the ground is rotten, and that we actually have to move that energy to changing policies and practices, that we need more transparency, that we need new rules. Early conversations I had this morning, so my first conversations were with people from Minneapolis talking about how the body cams actually didn't make the situation look bad at all. It was the camera from the cell phones that once the police chief saw that, then they instantly were like, oh, this is a problem. And so how often do body cameras, maybe because of their positioning, exonerate a police officer? So all of this is actually part of the story and part of how it's important that we are looking at these things from multiple perspectives, but constantly recognizing that systems don't change on their own. They are forced to change. Structures don't dismantle because we change our hearts and minds. They are broken down through the power of organized people, forcing them to do so. And in the process, people have to be fired. People have to lose their jobs and their standing. People have to suffer consequences in return for change to happen. None of this happens because we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. All of this happens because we get organized, we build power, and we make change happen.
Can I just chime in real quick and say, in addition to that, when change happens on a progressive level, the same people who ran over us with the spike wheels of justice should be held accountable and to the same law that they are enacting. There should be no what do they call that? Prosecutorial immunity, or immunities in general when it comes to that. I was looking for a quote from something that I saw Will Smith say. And what he said was, racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed. And what I want to say is that racism actually is getting worse, even though it's getting filmed. Because what's happening is the normalization of it. You turn on the news and what happened. I mean, this happened to me a few years ago. I turned on social media and I said, oh, wow, they're posting something about something that happened before, like something that happened a long time ago. And it was current. It was yesterday. It was like right then at that very moment. And I think what happens with us is I want people to understand that we should never give up hope in our own future. We should know that we were here, we were born on purpose and with a purpose. And we need to do everything in our power to bring about that thing that we were brought here to do. That magic that we can add to the pot to make the pot's ingredients what it needs to be. Because it's us. It's us that needs to make sure that it happens. But they know, and when I say they, I'm talking figuratively and literally. They know how powerful we are. And if they can take away our ability to recognize who we are, what we are, why we are, how we are, and where we are, then they've won. And I'm saying that they do that from the school to prison pipeline. They did that to me and my comrades at such young ages, 14 through 16. And they constantly do that to us as a people in general when they kill us and shoot us down to make us believe and understand that if we step up to try to build the next Black Wall Streets, then what happened with Black Wall Street will happen to us. And I'm saying step up anyway, push forward. We are the change that we seek. Just like Ava DuVernay had on one day, beautiful shirt. It said, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And we have to believe that we are.
I'd love to briefly add to what Rashad said and Dr. Salam said. You know, going back to this idea of the illusion of a post-racial society, I think about the fact that when we are telling these stories, we need to widen the lens and include the fact that I think of Dr. Kendi's work, right, in particular, and stamped from the beginning, that the fight against racism isn't linear, right? There's not like a bar where it's like anti-racism makes progress against racism. They're running on parallel tracks. And so as we make anti-racist progress, racists are making their own progress. And we have to understand that that's what's happening. That as we knock down the different legs that they use, they are building new supports to prop up racist systems. And, you know, that is really, really important to acknowledge. And the other thing, too, is adding to the narratives that get told, thinking back on the story from Central Park, Mr. Cooper, right? Everybody is quick to call out this white woman for calling the cops on him, as they should, but far less are really making the connection and saying that when a white woman calls the police on a Black man, there is a very real risk of death in that situation. And that is not because of bad apples or outliers, but is because of structural racism, structural systemic racism. And when we start going deeper in that and acknowledging that and naming that in our storytelling, then we're better able to identify our targets when we think about what those calls to action should be and where we should be moving.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. I mean, Amy Cooper is whatever she is, but Amy Cooper can't use her cell phone as a weapon unless those police are going to behave as a weapon, right? And so, yes, there is something about sort of egregious and appalling of us standing there and watching her feel certain that if she says, I'm a white woman standing in Central Park facing a Black man, but perhaps the most awful part is our absolute sense that means those officers will arrive and be enacted as weapons against Mr. Cooper. And that, I think, we have to retain a focus on that. Scott, I want to come to you for, you can jump in on this, but most specifically, I want to come to you because we keep wanting to think through important ways to take action. As Rashad was saying, taking that bridge to action. And as Dr. Salam was giving us, that action is not only storytelling externally, but the internal storytelling that we do. But then I also know that here we are in the middle of and we are still in the middle, not at the end, not 1/2 through. We're in the middle of a friggin' pandemic. And so I'm home and this is what my hair looks like, but I still want justice. So can you walk me through the new Winning Justice website that you all have at Color of Change have launched, and what it can do to help us on the track towards creating a more just system.
Yes, I would love to do that. Thank you. I think just connecting to everything that's been said before, right? You know, and what Rashad was saying, and that in these moments and every day, really, we want to give people the strategic actions that they can take when they've seen the stories, when they've heard about the suffering, when they've seen the videos, when they start to get an understanding of how unjust our system is, when, you know, when they read the New Jim Crow, whatever it is, and they say, well, what can I do about this? One of the things that we identified, as I was saying earlier, were the role of prosecutors. And so we found that people weren't necessarily paying attention to these offices. The vast majority of prosecutors were running unopposed. They didn't reflect the demographics of the communities they were representing often. And so we wanted to give people not just individual actions to take, which we started to do, like, you know, tell your prosecutor to bring charges against an officer who was involved in misconduct, or tell your, you know, prosecutor to end money bail in your community. We also wanted to give people an opportunity to dig deeper into who their local prosecutors were. So I'll quickly try to share my screen. We built the nation's first national database and directory, rather, of local prosecutors. It's located on our website, winningjustice.org. Hopefully everyone can see it. This is where you can learn more about the movement to hold prosecutors accountable, to change and transform the criminal justice system through prosecutors' offices. But it's also a place where you can learn about your local prosecutor or prosecutors really anywhere in the country. So on the site, you can click on the menu, which will bring up, you know, different places on the site that you can visit. There's an action tab where you can take actions. You can learn more about how we got to this point and the importance of prosecutors. The demands that we have 6 demand areas where we think if prosecutors take action in these areas, we'll be making significant progress towards transforming our justice system. But the thing I want to show folks right now is the prosecutor directory. So again, every elected prosecutor in the country is listed here in the directory, and folks can find your own or others that you may be looking for. So you can see here, you know, there's some stuff around prosecutors, but the main function I want to show folks is that you can search for prosecutors. So if you want to know who your prosecutor is, if you want to learn more about how to contact them, how to where they stand on certain issues, things of that nature, you can search the directory. Here in record types, we'll just put all. Basically, you have a choice of districts or people or all. Districts means just if you put in your zip code, it tells you basically what the prosecutor's office is, what area they represent. If you put in people, you get a page that gives your profile of the prosecutor in that place. So let's say you are looking at what's happening in Minneapolis and you're hearing the call to action being that the local prosecutor needs to bring charges against the officers. You say, well, who is this guy where he's seen the video that we've all seen and he doesn't think that we should be bringing charges yet, which is actually what's happening right now as we record this. If you put in the zip code 55407, it's a Minneapolis zip code, you'll see down here, you get both the district, Hennepin, which tells us about the place. And there's information there where you can see who the prosecutor is, Michael Freeman. We'll click on that in a second and learn more about him. But there's demographic information about the districts. So you can see the racial composition of the district that he represents. You can see the racial composition for both the broad population, but also for registered voters in that place. Even electoral results from previous presidential elections give you a sense of.
Scott, wait, go back, Scott, for a minute, because this is crucial. I just want to show that the district is scooch back. It's like 69% white. The district itself, 69.6% white, but registered voters are 91% white. I mean, I'm sure some of that is age because we know that like the populations are younger, but that's massive.
That is
That's massive.
massive difference. And Minneapolis is a relatively diverse, city. If you visited there, there's a lot of Black immigrants in Minneapolis. And that may also be, we may be seeing a repression factor here as well. I always want to say that when you see that Black folks are registered. And there may be some issues in terms of citizenship also, right? But I think if you look down here, since we dig it in, you can see that within this district, Hillary Clinton won by a huge margin. So I think there's still this question around democratic strongholds, whether that's translating to progress in criminal justice, whether prosecutor offices or in other ways. So, hopefully we could change that. But the last thing I just want to show you is the prosecutor page. So you can see here, Michael Freeman. Again, this is the man who has yet to charge the officers in the killing of George Floyd. But you can see here how to contact him, the website for his office, things of that nature. Down here, one of the things that we're doing with the database is we're building a volunteer team that is going to actually start to rate people on our 6 demands or 6 issue areas. This page hasn't been rated yet, but I think it'll get to the top of the priority list pretty soon. So folks, you may on some sites, on some prosecutors' pages, see ratings and information about where they stand on some of the key positions. But yeah, that's the database. We hope that it's a tool that people can use to learn more about who their local prosecutors are in big national moments like this, to find out, learn more about these targets. And this is a tool for folks to really educate themselves. And there's lots of ways to get involved if you check out winningjustice.org. Thank you.
That's very powerful, and it has data, which is high nerd joy for me, because I actually think when we operate in the world with real information, it makes a difference. We're almost to where we're going to wrap, but I just want to, and Rashad and I are going to take sort of the very last piece with a little bit of privilege at the end, but I do want to give, Tiffany, I want to give you a moment, and Dr. Salam, I want to give you a moment. If you have kind of a one last thing that you want the folks who've stuck with us for this whole hour to take away, there's one big message around either the narratives emerging from when they see us, or about the whole way that the system of prosecution and defense works. There's one big takeaway, what you'd like it to be. Tiffany, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, DAs in so many places are elected officials, and a lot of folks don't know that. And, true to electoral politics, where you get your votes and where you get your money matters. And so we have to make sure, as communities, as directly impacted folks, that we organize around these races, because we need to be the people that they are accountable to. And it will affect the way that, powerful actors in the system react. Like I said, harm reduction, but we need it because this harm reduction saves lives. And so we have an opportunity to say that our DA's roles are not to criminalize poverty, are not to criminalize mental health issues or substance use disorder, are not to at all costs throw Black and brown folks in cages, but it is to contribute to public safety in our communities. And that means, in a lot of ways, not prosecuting. That means holding people accountable in systems that are destabilizing communities, right? We like to criminalize substance use and struggles with drugs. We like to criminalize people who are stealing or other things for survival, but we have actors in this space that destabilize entire communities, whether it's landlords who unlawfully evict, or whether it's employers who steal wages, understanding that those harms have big impacts to entire communities that then are, the root causers of all types of offenses, right? So if we want to be, really smart about the tools that are available in that office and start using them to our ends while we are tearing down the system and dismantling the system, it's so incredibly important to get involved in these races, get educated around them, And then most importantly, go out and vote for people who are committed to, one, having directly impacted communities at the table in policy making and decision making, and two, that are willing to divest power.
And hopefully we won't have to go out and vote. Hopefully we'll be able to stay in and vote. But yes, I'm with you. I hear you. And thank you for really leading us through thinking about how that those systems and individuals work together. Dr. Salam, let me give you a last word here.
I want to say man plans, God plans, and God is the best of planners. So when they see us with such a brilliant, beautiful, smell the roses kind of moment for me and for the rest of the guys, that I want to, like, the play on the title was beautiful for me, right? They didn't see us. Yeah. They didn't see who they had. They didn't know who they had. And the beauty of what happened to us was that we were allowed in a way to become these beautiful butterflies that were trapped in this cocoon. And many of us were able to take our minds and do things with it that allowed it to stay free, even though we were physically in bondage. And so I want the viewing audience to understand that we are a mighty people, that when we were brought into this world, we were one of over 400 million options, and we made it. And therefore, we were born on purpose with a purpose. I can't say that enough for folks to understand. We are here because we were supposed to be here. There's something that we can contribute and have to contribute. And I don't want you to be on your deathbed, as has been said many times over. And instead of you having been able to provide and give birth to your hopes and your dreams and aspirations, I don't want you to be on your deathbed being one of those individuals contributing to the wealthiest place on the planet, the graveyard. Give everything inside of you an opportunity to come out. Give birth to it. Be unapologetic about it. Live full, as my good friend Les Brown says, and die empty.
Dr. Salam, last week was a terrible week for me because it's the week in which I'd lost 4 friends all in one week. Wow. Several years ago. But one of those dear friends, colleague, my mentor was Maya Angelou. And just now, as you were talking about your mind and spirit being free in the context of physical bondage, that was core for her. It was a central teaching. When I think of the book of Dr. Angelou, she regularly read to us from O Black and Unknown Bards. She regularly thought about that. And I wanted to say thank you for re-evoking that image of the ways that we have to find freedom, even in the context of bondage.
Can I just echo just one thing that Dr. Maya Angelou taught me? She taught me how to become an alchemist. Mm-hmm. When she said, you should be angry, but you must not be bitter. She said, bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. And then this is the teaching of how to become an alchemist. She said, use that anger. You dance it, you march it, you vote it, you do everything about it. And then she said, you talk it, never stop talking it.
Thank you for giving me back some of her in this moment. Rashad, we're going to take the last moment or so. I am so appreciative always of the work that Color of Change is doing. When I think about, in fact, what a beautiful moment the debut of When They See Us was. My own teenage daughter who's graduating from high school and going on to college, it never really occurred to me she didn't know the story. Like, I just sort of think she knows whatever I know. She does not. And she watched all of the nights and it was really powerful and eye-opening. So I'm so grateful that you remind us of that in the context of everything. But Rashad, let me give you, as our host, with Color of Change, our last sort of moment. Is there something, of course, obviously, we should log on to the site, but is there something you want to leave us with?
So yes, log on to Winning Justice. Thank you to the other panelists for joining us, but also for your work, for your leadership, for your stories, for everything that you do out in the world. Thank you, Melissa, for taking us on this journey, as always. And for all of you, right, who are watching, the opportunity to make change is in our hands. The fight to make something new and something better is in our hands. And I hope that people will recognize that this is not work for individuals alone. This is work about building collective power. It's about us coming together and fighting for something better. It's about us getting involved in elections, but recognizing that elections alone do not change the rules. It's about recognizing that we also can't win if we don't vote. And so all of those things are part of the project to win justice, to make freedom possible, and to remake a system that is unfortunately doing is exactly what it was designed to do. But we can break it. And so I hope that people will join us at colorofchange.org. I hope that people will join us at winningjustice.org. Join a squad. Join in with people at the local level fighting to hold district attorneys accountable. Join efforts to make justice real. And so that's my hope. That's my ask. And that is what I hope to end us on.
And that's the alchemy, right? That's the alchemy. That is how we will take the anger, the righteous anger of this moment, and we will turn it into something that helps to reduce harm, that helps to advance justice. We will be angry. We will not be bitter. And we will join together to do that collective alchemy. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for the Color of Change Town Hall. Thank you to Ava DuVernay for always giving us these important moments and stories and cultural products. Thank you to those who are right now imprisoned, incarcerated, who have been arrested, who are risking their lives simply by being incarcerated in the context of a pandemic. And thank all of you who took a moment in the midst of how difficult all of this is to spend a little time with us. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. Thank you to all of the panelists, and stay safe, stay well, stay angry, never bitter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.